Thanks so much. Good evening and welcome to the October 20th, 2022 Open Space Conservation Trust video meeting. I'm Geraldine Poor, the Vice Chair of the Open Space Conservancy Trust Board. And in accordance with Proclamation 2028.10 and the Governor's extended Safe Start order, tonight's meeting is using video conferencing technology provided by Zoom. The Zoom video of this meeting is being recorded and will be broadcast live via Zoom and will be uploaded to the city's YouTube channel tomorrow. City staff by the names of Parks Operations Manager Sam Harb, Natural Resource Project Manager Lizzie Stone, and Deputy Public Works Director Elaine Summergren are participating in tonight's meeting remotely. Other public audience members may be listening to the meeting by telephone or via the internet. Welcome to all, and thank you for joining us tonight. Trustees, please ensure your microphones are turned on for the roll call. And Sam, I'll turn that to you.
Yeah, Chair Brissett. Vice Chair Poor.
Here.
Secretary Ete.
Here.
Trustee Bender. Trustee Olson.
Here.
Council Liaison Andro.
Here.
Trustee Hildebrandt.
Here.
Thank you. Trustees, before we start the business of tonight's meeting, I'd like to suggest a few rules to help the meeting run smoothly. If a board member has a question, please use your raise hand function and I'll do my best to recognize trustees in the order in which hands are raised. Everyone will be asked to limit himself or herself to one question and one clarifying question if necessary, so that each trustee has a chance to ask a question before a board member is given another chance to ask a question. It's important that each trustee has an opportunity to speak or ask a question before the second question is asked. In addition, prior to speaking, please state your name for those listening in on the meeting. And I have the opportunity now to read information about the public appearances, but did staff say there are none?
That's correct. There are no public appearances.
So may I skip that paragraph?
Yeah.
Thank you. So the first item of regular business is to review and approve and consider approving the minutes from the July 21st meeting of 2022. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of that meeting?
I'd move approval.
And a second?
I'll second that.
So motion by Craig and a second by Tom. All in favor, please. Let's first ask, is there any discussion?
Yes, I noticed a small typo. Cities should be possessive rather than declarative. So that's just changing in the first sentence, I believe. It was cities wanted to be turned into possessive. Let's see if I can bring that up. Oh, now I'm not sure where exactly that appeared.
Sounds like something that staff can check for, and we don't need to be too specific.
Right.
And then Craig also.
Well, Chair Bender's not here, but it was on the possible bike rack location, and it was this said the southeast corner of the northeast quad. I think it was the northwest quad instead of the northeast quad, but we're still going to discuss that anyway. So
Was that under item 4, do you think?
that was page 2 of the minutes.
Staff, do you want to clarify where that is, or shall we just note?
Oh, it's in item 3 under the Engstrom title transfer. The Engstrom open space is still in the city's name, city apostrophe S. So,
Okay,
Both changes are noted and will be corrected in the final
right.
minutes.
thank you so much. Any other items? No, then all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
I,
And those opposed, nay? Thank you. The motion passes and the minutes are approved. The second item of regular business is the annual herbicide application report. And we welcome Lizzie Stone, the Natural Resource Project.
Audio. No,
Okay, we're good. Well, I don't know.
your position.
Okay.
Good.
And we also welcome Marie
I don't
Bender.
think so.
Hi,
Can
Marie.
anybody hear me?
We can,
No.
yes.
Check speaker, go to audio, click on the arrow.
Yeah, Marie, I think we can hear you.
Yeah, you're on the,
Is it the right speakers?
it's a microphone. You should be in the webcam.
Sam, could you, I think as a host, possibly
No.
you can mute Marie.
Try the,
Thank you.
go.
Can you hear me now? No.
We can, yeah, we can hear you. I'll take that as a moment to, can y'all hear me? Yes, okay, great. Yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna share my screen here to give a quick report on our herbicide use. Do you see my pretty Grand Canyon view there? Let's see. And I'm going to
It's coming.
It's coming. Okay. All right. Yes, you can see it. Good. Okay. So I am here to talk about the herbicide that was used on trust properties in 2021 and also talk about our surveys for weeds and our planned use of herbicide for 2022. You all have seen the staff report that it was pretty slim. We didn't have a lot of activity out there with herbicides over the last year. But I am just want to cover it for you as part of the herbicide use protocol. The herbicide use protocol that was approved in 2010 does require that staff report out on any herbicide use. So that is what we are doing here now. So what I'm showing you is a map of Pioneer Park and Engstrom open space. It is showing you that they're up in the northeast quadrant was some herbicide use there, and then also the southeast quadrant. We did survey throughout the entire trust properties for a bunch of different types of weeds, knotweed, yellow flag iris, spotted jewelweed, yellow archangel, shiny geranium, among many others. We found yellow archangel and shiny geranium populations in the park. Yellow archangel was found in the north edge of the northwest quadrant, as well as the south edge of the southeast quadrant. But those populations were small enough that we were able to pull them out by hand in 2021, so no herbicide was used. We also found a shiny geranium population with the help of the King County Noxious Weed Program staff. They did treat that shiny geranium in the north edge of the southeast quadrant with a 1% triclopyr and a dilute adjuvant or surfactant there. And that is something that we talked about last year during this presentation, that was something that was done by the King County Noxious Weed staff on a regulated weed that we are required to manage, and it was not covered by the herbicide use protocol at the time. So we will be reviewing and hopefully maybe making some amendments to the herbicide use protocol that would allow for treating regulated weeds in this next segment here, but I just want to call that out and acknowledge that that was done outside of the bounds of the protocol, and we note that. The blue area in the north edge of the northeast quadrant there is where we did some invasive tree treatment or non-native tree treatment. We had professional contractors come in and treat our English holly, our cherry laurels, There were some hawthorn and potential to be myriad other invasive trees that were treated using the injection method, using an easy eject lance and copperhead shells that have imazapyr, dry stable imazapyr in them in compliance with the herbicide use protocol. And any smaller trees were cut and then painted with a concentrated herbicide solution. So that area up there was treated in that way in 2021. Let's see, how do I move forward? Here I'm showing you our 2022 monitoring and planned herbicide treatment map. We had our summer crew monitoring throughout all of trust properties. Again, for those similar species, our yellow archangel, knotweed, yellow flag iris, spotted jewelweed, shiny geranium. We did find yellow archangel again in the same locations, the north edge of the northwest quadrant and the south edge of the southeast quadrant. In the southeast quadrant, those populations were pretty small and we were able to remove those by hand again. Up in the north edge of the northwest quadrant, those populations had grown quite a bit. So we did spray them with a dilute glyphosate solution over the summer. I did contact all of the neighbors that had properties adjacent to where we were treating and found that yellow archangel, and provided them some information about what that weed looks like and how to identify it and handle it on their own properties, and let them know about the use of herbicide and how to be cautious around it. We also have found or have had contractors doing comprehensive weed removal on in the northeast quadrant and southeast quadrant, which is represented in this light blue here. Our comprehensive weed removal protocol does include the possibility for invasive tree treatment. Those two areas are just shown as a possible area where that can occur or could have occurred this year. And I actually just got word from the contractor in the southeast quadrant that he's finished up that work, and any of the trees he found this year were small enough to be able to have been dug up by hand. So he didn't really actually need to use it, but just wanted to acknowledge that that was originally our plan when I made this slide. Same for this area here in the northeast quadrant that would likely have just been cut and paint on invasive trees, but so far we have not needed to do that. That work should be finished up soon. In red here we have a few yellow flag iris plants that were found by our summer crew. They cut the flowers off so that they wouldn't go to seed. We have not treated those because that is not a plant that's covered by our herbicide use protocol at this time. We will talk about that again in this next agenda item. But I just wanted to acknowledge that we did find it there on the property. And as far as other weeds that have been found in the past, we have not found any knotweed in the last 2 years. We this year did not find any jewelweed either. I think our management of both of those species has been pretty effective. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen. My other slides that I have here are really just talking about the specific herbicide uses that we have. How do I stop? And I'm happy to go into more details if anybody has any questions about that, but if not, we're going to talk more about herbicide in a minute here. I think Marie has a question.
Go ahead, Marie. Welcome.
It looks like you might be muted.
There we go. First of all, I apologize for being late. I've been coming and going and leaving home and coming home and leaving home all summer long. The weed at the top in the northwest. It seems like we're not gonna get control of that if we don't work with the neighbors. Is there any possibility we could do a joint project with the neighbors and just try to eradicate it?
That's a really good question.
That's where we've been dealing with that issue.
Yes, you are right. That has been around for a long time. From my notes, it looks like that first was identified in 2010, and there's been varying levels of treatment for a long time in that area. I did have some good conversations with the neighbors there. They seemed very understanding and not shocked to hear that that was an aggressive plant. I think it makes a lot of sense to continue those conversations and see what type of approach they're willing to take on their own properties to make sure that we can actually get a handle on that population. I think that's probably a good idea, because it does seem like once we start to get a handle on it, we leave it or just hand pull it for 1 year and it comes back from the adjacent property. So I think you're onto something there, and that's something I can pursue.
I mean, are we using a contractor or doing it with city staff?
This year, well, actually, I'm pretty sure most years we do it with the seasonal city crew. So I was out there with the crew.
I'm just
And-
thinking, do the project all in one piece. I mean, volunteer to help them or do it together and have them pay for their part or something like that, would just address the problem.
Yeah, I am not quite sure how it works to do something with all in one big project with a contractor or anything like that, but I can talk to our team about that and what options are available. I also understand that maybe some folks aren't as interested in using herbicides on their own properties or things like that. So I would want to make sure that we're working with what worked for the neighbors, and I too am interested in getting it figured out, and I like where you're headed with that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from trust members? Great. I believe our next item is an action item, and it is approving the herbicide use protocols. So Lizzie, would you like to transition to that? Thanks.
A lot of screens here. It's a little hard to keep track of which one has my mouse on it. Let's see. Oops, nope, sorry, just a second. Okay. I'm going to share my screen here again. All right, can I get a thumbs up if y'all are able to see that? Great. Okay. So, as I just mentioned, the original herbicide use protocol for the Open Space Conservancy Trust was adopted in 2010, and it defines the situations when we can use herbicide on trust properties. This protocol does require that trust board members review and approve the any new, I guess, approve or reject any new uses of herbicide in Pioneer Park and Engstrom. Since the last revision in 2016, the natural resources team has continued to adapt our practices around the island, and we are paying attention to new research and observations of what is working well in the field. So I come to you now with some different revisions that are consistent with what we've been doing in other parts of the island, and I am interested to hear your thoughts. So I want to bring up some of the specific changes that I want your input on. As an overview, this is going through what the staff report described. I want to talk through the considerations that we think of when we're looking at different chemicals, specifically triclopyr and imazapyr, and what those might be more effective at managing certain weeds and can be alternatives to glyphosate treatment. But there are trade-offs, and I want to lay those out for you and hear what you think. I want to also propose that we reduce the instances that herbicide is allowed to be used on ivy on trust properties. I want to propose that we allow for a cut and treat approach on blackberry where it's growing up through native plants. And I also want to introduce a couple of new species that have been found in the park and are not included in the protocol to make sure that we are managing new weed populations as they pop up. So I want to start out this conversation by reminding board members that I and the natural resources team really don't take the use of herbicide lightly. We recognize that these are really powerful tools and that they can cause a lot of harm if they're used inappropriately or excessively. And I keep that in mind closely. I'm thinking about it a lot. In alignment with, I guess, the spirit of this herbicide use protocol and why it exists, our team is very thoughtful and conservative when we do decide to use these chemicals as a tool when we're managing our landscapes. And we use them in the cases where leaving the plants alone or manually removing then we consider that to be more disruptive or damaging to the landscape. So we try to only use herbicides in those cases. I also just want to point out that our crew is always using proper protective equipment when using herbicides. We exercise a lot of caution when we're mixing or transporting or applying herbicides. We do post signage in accordance with the protocol and make sure that anyone using the park is aware that treatments have been done. And we also, this year I have made a point, like I mentioned in my last presentation, to inform adjacent homeowners and properties to let them know about any treatments that do come close to their properties. So jumping right in, I wanted to give a little overview of the chemical glyphosate. Glyphosate is an extremely commonly used herbicide, and it is probably, I think, the most common in the world. This is the primary chemical that is approved for use in the herbicide use protocol at this time. This glyphosate is a systemic herbicide, which means that it moves from the leaves and stems down into the roots of a plant, and it kills the plant entirely, which rather than just killing the green part at the top, which makes it very effective. Systemic herbicides make it so that you have to have fewer revisits to continue to add herbicide year after year. It is effective at both killing both broadleaf plants and grasses. Glyphosate binds really tightly when it comes in contact with soil, which is a good thing because that makes it so that other plants' roots that are in the soil are not taking up any of that glyphosate. It is bound tightly enough that plants aren't able to use it once it's in the soil. Also, that means that it's not leaching into our water column. So those are important things to note. The aquatic formulations of glyphosate, which is what we are approved to use and what we use, are shown to be practically non-toxic to fish, invertebrates, birds, or mammals, and it's shown to be safe for amphibians, including our frogs and our salamanders, which is a large reason why it is approved for use in the herbicide protocol at this point. I also want to acknowledge that there is a lot of controversy about there being conflicting information about the human health implications of glyphosate and its use. The International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, which is a committee within the World Health Organization, has classified glyphosate as probably carcinogenic in humans, whereas the US's Environmental Protection Agency has countered that with their own research studies saying, and they have concluded that it is not likely to be carcinogenic. And that stance is backed up by many different regulatory agencies around the world. This is a discrepancy that's being argued fiercely in lawsuits and in many different conversations on both sides. And I don't know who is right or how I can't solve it. But it is something that I am considering. And I think that we need to keep in mind when thinking about what herbicides we use. And I will continue to watch it closely. And I encourage you to do that too. I want to talk about adding a chemical called triclopyr as an option for treating our weedy trees, such as our holly and our cherry laurels or Portuguese laurel. Also for treating our blackberry stems, or as an alternate tool for treating difficult to manage herbaceous weeds. Triclopyr is another very commonly used herbicide. It is only effective on broadleaf plants, so it's good to use when you want to treat a specific broadleaf weed that is growing around grasses, because the surrounding grasses will be fine and they can grow in to fill in that space in that weed's place. The King County Noxious Weed Control Program notes several instances where triclopyr is a more effective chemical to use than glyphosate, specifically when treating cut stems of weedy trees, and also with yellow archangel in particular. They say a triclopyr glyphosate combination is a lot more effective than just glyphosate, which is what we've been using before. The EPA considers this chemical a class or a group D chemical, which means that it's unable to be classified for its human carcinogenicity, which is somewhat unsatisfying. It does have some other health implications in that if it gets in your eyes, it can cause some serious damage, and it needs to be used with caution. It's not a chemical that you want to be using casually without your PPE. In the environment, triclopyr doesn't bind as closely to soils as our glyphosate does. It is somewhat mobile, which means that it can possibly be absorbed by plant roots when it's oversprayed and gets into the soil, which means that it can possibly be absorbed by the non-target plant roots. So that's something we do want to try to avoid. The average half-life of triclopyr in soil is a month to a month and a half. But that can vary really widely depending on the soil conditions. So that's something to keep in mind, that it doesn't bind as closely, which means that it has potential to leach into water. There hasn't been a lot of evidence to show that that actually does happen, or it moves too deep into the soil or water column, but it has more potential to do that. So that's something that we keep in mind. As far as wildlife, it is slightly or practically non-toxic to birds, fish, invertebrates, and mammals. And there's just not as much research showing the impacts of triclopyr on amphibians. I did find a couple of studies that showed that it had no negative impacts on bullfrog tadpoles or on red-legged tree frogs and a couple of other amphibians. And there was no evidence of negative impacts, but there just isn't as much data out there about this one as there is about glyphosate, showing that it doesn't have negative effects. The next chemical I want to mention is another really common systemic herbicide called imazapyr. Like glyphosate, it works on both broadleaf and grassy species. It is very slow acting on plants, which makes it particularly powerful and effective on treating weedy trees, and really difficult to control weeds like knotweed. This is a group E compound, which means that the EPA has stated that it shows no evidence of carcinogenicity in humans. And that said, concentrated imazapyr can be harmful if it's inhaled or if it gets in your eyes. So it's something that we want to use caution when using. This chemical does not bind tightly to soils, which means that it can be absorbed by nearby plants and through their roots. It does take several months to break down in the soil. And has potential to leach into groundwater. So those are things that we want to keep in mind. And for all of these chemicals, this would only be relevant when it's coming into a lot of contact with soil because of an overspraying situation, which we already are trying to avoid by using these very carefully. So I want to put that caveat out there. The aquatic formulation that we would be using is practically non-toxic to fish and vertebrates, birds, or mammals. And similar to triclopyr, it hasn't been shown to have negative impacts on our amphibians, but again, there's just not as much data out there. Currently in the herbicide use protocol, imazapyr is approved for our tree injections, like in this photo here, where we are using a dry, stable form of imazapyr and injecting it into the sides of our trees. I propose expanding the allowable use to also include knotweed, because the King County Noxious Weeds program has shown that a foliar spray of imazapyr is the most effective chemical that we use, that we could use. It's more effective than glyphosate, which might mean that we need to do fewer follow-up treatments and less herbicide needs to be used overall when we're using a chemical that is more effective. So those are all of the various different considerations that I am trying to balance when thinking about what chemicals we're going to be using and when. Next, I want to just jump over to talking about our the changes that I made to the English IV approach in the protocol. Specifically, I would like to limit the approved herbicide treatment uses of IV. So currently, the 2010 version of the herbicide use protocol allows for use of glyphosate on monocultures of ivy. So it can currently be sprayed on anywhere that ivy is more than 50% of the plant cover. We have not been doing that. We don't use foliar spray of herbicide on ivy in general, but it is allowed according to the protocol. This year, we have started our comprehensive weed removal efforts and seen in more than 8 acres of Pioneer Park that removing this ivy by hand has actually turned out to be pretty effective. The soils in Pioneer Park are well drained and fairly loose in the summertime. There's like a lot of duff on top, and that makes it fairly easy and feasible to pull out most of those roots by hand. And we'll plan on coming to follow up and do follow-up maintenance of those areas. So I am proposing that it is not necessary to allow for treatment of ivy everywhere in the park. That said, there are steep slopes where manually removing that ivy would cause a lot of erosion and be stirring up soil in these already very fragile ecosystems. So my proposal here is to maintain allow that herbicide can still be used on ivy on steep slopes when removing all weeds, but only on steep slopes. Anywhere else it needs to be removed by hand. Next, I wanted to talk about
Lizzie, before you jump into the next one,
sure.
I wonder if it looks like Lisa has a question. So
Oh, yeah, thanks. Sorry, I can't see other people.
no, I figured.
Yes,
Okay,
Lisa.
thanks. Yeah, and I raised my hand before we went to are there questions, because I'm going to lose track of all the slides. But the two questions that I have, and you kind of answered one a little bit, but the first question that I don't think has been answered is, what does practically non-toxic mean? And the second question is, does the use of these new herbicides, which I have concerns about because of the properties that you've been describing, mean that we will be able to use less Roundup and less overall chemicals? As you know, there is a very heated community sentiment about this issue. And so I just want to ask the questions.
I appreciate the question. So for practically non-toxic, that is the least toxic category that they have for how they define define these. The EPA classifies each chemical and it by its toxicity for each, various different animals, for mammals, birds, aquatic invertebrates and things like that. And there's different groupings. Practically non-toxic is the least toxic of those. I don't have like the official definition of what that means, but I do know that that is the best that when I see that is kind of that very promising, because that's the best that they offer for us toxicity wise.
Well, they don't offer a non-toxic classification?
That is the lowest on classification that they offer. Yes.
Oh,
that
okay.
I'm aware of. That's the lowest I've ever seen. Maybe Elaine knows differently than I on that, but that's as far as I'm aware, the lowest classification. And if I will follow up on that if I am incorrect and let you know. But and also I can just tell you a definition of what that is, but I'd have to look it up and get back to you. As for introducing those other chemicals that have pros and cons, yes, the reason that we would introduce those chemicals is because they are more effective. We would introduce them in the cases where they are more effective than glyphosate so that we can use less herbicide overall. So they would be used potentially as a mixture with glyphosate, where both of them are more dilute, and we would do that when we know that the mixture is more effective, and we would have to do fewer follow-up treatments. And so in the total span of time that we're managing a weed, it would be fewer treatments and therefore less herbicide used on that weed over time. So yes, that is the intention, to use less Roundup and also ideally use less herbicide overall. I would like to not be just introducing other chemicals and using even more of them. That is not what I want either.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I don't know if I know I'm supposed to wait. Oh, Hillary's got a question. So I do have another question from way back. So,
okay.
But I'll wait my turn.
Okay, Hillary.
Hi, Lizzie. Thanks for everything you've talked about so far. My one concern here is, despite the fact that we have a no harvesting rule for Pioneer Park and the potential carcinogenic effects of, I think you said it was the triclopyr on humans, or we just don't know enough yet. Are we concerned that people might be harvesting berries and edibles anyway, and then dealing with that risk?
Good question. As far as blackberries in particular, no, because we are only treating blackberries that have already been cut. There are no berries involved anywhere near the plants that have been treated. They have been there. This is a cut stem approach. We haven't gotten to that yet. We're going to get to in a second, but so no, as far as that goes, I'm not concerned about eating the plants. I am trying to think through any of the species. So with our invasive trees and our cut stem approach on that, no. And then with our herbaceous weeds, I don't believe that any of them have any edible desirable traits. Elaine, I see you have unmuted and appeared here. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do have thoughts on it. Good evening, trustees. Elaine Summergren, Deputy Director of Public Works. So I just wanted to jump in and say that's a great point. Hillary, I think, you know, there's a lot of conversation about blackberries specifically with this, and as Lizzie is addressing and will address, you know, we aren't ever letting blackberries that are treated in any way ever go to fruit. We're either spraying very short regrowth in other parks, or in Pioneer, what Lizzie's proposing here is actually cutting them very near to the ground. So there's no chance of them fruiting. I think you raise a really good point about other potentially harvestable plants. So as you said, we have a no harvesting rule. That doesn't mean that people don't harvest. We really do try and keep track of those plants that are of interest, both, you know, and across cultures, right, for potential edible plants. So even if people aren't paying attention to the no harvesting signs, you know, for example, we see people taking fiddle heads off of ferns and things like that. So, you know, Lizzie is keeping track of which species, obviously, that are included in the herbicide use protocol. And if those have any overlap with potential, you know, edible species, things like that, we really try and stay up on things that people might actually be interested in harvesting and looking at alternate ways to control those. So I think it's a point really well taken, and I think it's a really good thing to bring to light. And I think we're all learning constantly about what people are interested in foraging in our public forests. So,
Great.
So I appreciate the comment.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for clarifying, because I just think, you know, beyond blackberries, which I know is, to Lisa's point, what most people talk about harvesting, there are so many forageable foods in our forests, and between, you know, like the herbaceous ground layer, especially with miners lettuce and things like that, and mushroom foraging and all these things. I'm curious as to, you know, I mean, obviously we can't prevent all overspray. So I'm curious whether that is something that we're going to continue to look at. And it sounds like we are. Thank you.
Yeah, I think to address that, possibly after you're done with your slides, it would be really good for you to talk about the limitations of foliar spraying across any of our herbicide uses, just because it is so limited. And that's really one of the only places where we see the potential for non-target species to have any amount of herbicide on them, because the other approaches are so targeted. So I think that might be a good thing for you to address.
Yeah, I will try to make a point to do that. Thanks. And Lisa, it looks like you have one more question. I've pulled up the gallery here.
Yeah,
so.
thanks. If nobody else wants to ask anything, I guess I was just wondering, it seemed like when I saw the 2021 map of like where there were invasive species and what there was, I'm like, wow, this is cool. There's hardly anything going on. And then saw 2022 and I'm like, ooh, is there, do you have anything you can enlighten us on about why there is such a big difference in those between those 2 years, or is that just a cyclical thing?
Great question. So the map from 2021 is where treatments occurred. That is not all of the places where invasive trees exist. I should have made that clear. We had contractors out to treat that one small section of Pioneer Park in 2021, which is not to say that all of the other places didn't or nowhere else needed that treatment. As far as other weeds, we did still find that yellow archangel and had, like I mentioned, we had hand pulled that. And so ideally that wouldn't be so cyclical. Our approach there wasn't super successful. And that's something that I'm keeping in mind for the future. I think that hand pulling the area on the north end. In hindsight, probably we jumped to that non-herbicide approach a little too quickly before we had a good control over that population. And so we're trying to get a handle on it again and we'll keep that in mind for the future. I guess my impression is we really didn't find that much more in 2022. It's just that we had contractors out working on more area. So they treated more trees because they were on more ground. And we did find that the only really new thing we found was that yellow flag iris. Everything else is actually looking really good, I think, as far as the fact that there's no knotweed found, that there was no jewelweed found this year, which is great. We found some shiny geranium, but the treatment had worked very well. So we were able to just pull a couple plants by hand. I think in general, I think there's been a lot of success. That's the impression that I have.
Okay, perfect. And you probably said that these were areas that were treated, and I didn't understand that meant that there were areas that hadn't been. So that's a great explanation, and thank you. And I'm really excited about the decline in the knotweed population because that is a nasty one. So
yeah,
good work.
Yeah, I guess that's something for me to keep in mind with my presentation next year, to maybe have a map that shows the survey and then the treatments separately, so that I'm clarifying the progress over time, because just because we're working in more area doesn't mean we're losing ground. If anything, the better. Good things. Yeah. Okay. I'm almost finished. I'm on slide 7 out of 8, and then we'll ask more questions if we want. So I did want to talk about, which we've already sort of touched on, our blackberry approach that I would like to introduce. Primarily in Pioneer Park, our approach for managing blackberry long-term is more of like a prevention approach, a cultural approach to plant trees in our canopy gaps and shade out that sun-loving blackberry to prevent it from taking hold. But as you'll know, it's very good at doing what it does. It grows it grows quickly, and in some areas has already formed a thicket. In those areas, we almost all of the time remove it manually by cutting the stems and then digging out those roots with shovels. But there are certain cases where blackberry is growing up through a native plant, and y'all may have seen that. It grows up like through the middle of a beaked hazelnut, and in order to manage that specific plant, you would have to dig out our native desirable plant. And so what I'm proposing here is that we allow for a cut and paint direct approach of applying herbicide onto those cut stems. That involves cutting it to 6 inches. So there aren't even any leaves on the plant. We paint on herbicide, which then gets incorporated down into the roots and kills that specific blackberry plant. So I propose doing that, allowing for that only when they're growing up through our native plants, and everywhere else managing those with manual removal. That is a practice that we do in other parks around the island, allowing for a cut paint approach when things are growing up through our native plants. And in some cases, when there's blackberry growing on a steep slope or something, we'll allow for cutting it back and allowing it to regrow. In other parks, again, that's not true in Pioneer Park. So I guess I'm just trying to catch Pioneer Park and Engstrom or trust properties up to the protocols that we use and have seen work well in other parks around the island. Okay. I went off my notes a little bit there, but hopefully that wasn't too confusing. And then last thing I want to bring your attention to is that there were a couple of species found in the park in the last year, or well, since the last revision, that are not currently included in the protocol, but should be managed soon before they're allowed to take over. One of them is that yellow flag iris that was found on the western edge of the southeast quadrant. That plant was found by our crew this year. They cut those flowers off to make sure that it didn't go to seed, and we have not treated it, but I would love to be able to go manage it and make sure it doesn't spread anymore around the park. We also, as I mentioned before, had King County noxious weeds out and find shiny geranium, which is a really very aggressive plant that can grow in the understory, and it grows underneath ivy. That's how good it is at growing in shady understories areas. So we definitely don't want to allow that to start to take over in Pioneer Park. So my proposal here is to add those to the protocol so that we are allowed to use the chemicals that we need to treat them. And also I included a caveat in the protocol that acknowledges that some weeds, including shiny geranium, are regulated by King County noxious weeds. We are required to manage them, and it allows, I put in a caveat that allows us to manage those weeds as they come up rather than having to wait for another cycle of revisions for the protocol. But in those rare cases that we find a small population, allowing for treatment of that small population before it starts to take hold. So that is that. I think that's all I have to say about it. And I'm very open to a discussion and hearing your thoughts. Looks like Marie maybe had a question. Oh, looks like you're muted, Marie. There you go.
So I have a couple questions. One is, and this is sort of a follow-on to Hillary's question about, people foraging. Should we be incorporating maybe into the protocols a seasonal aspect? So I'm thinking of things like, mushrooms and nettles that are foraged at certain times of the year. So maybe we should not be applying these things at those times. I mean, nettles in particular could be grown anywhere. So if you're treating blackberries, you might end up affecting nettles, for example. So I don't know, maybe there's a seasonal aspect to the treatment protocol that we ought to be considering.
Good point, thanks. So currently there is a seasonal aspect, and that is that we are following the research for when the treatments are the most effective. So I know that, for example, the first thing that comes to mind is our invasive trees. Our treatments are much more effective when we inject or cut and paint those in the fall, for example. So we are choosing the season based on that. I think it makes, I guess another thing is that this season is determined by weather in large part. We can't spray when it's raining. And so that is something that we already consider. And I guess right now, season of like forage season hasn't been incorporated into our decision making, but I'm open to that as a possibility. I'm remembering now that Elaine asked me to talk about our foliar spray limitations, and I can do that, which kind of might go hand in hand with your question there too. So I guess I don't really have an answer, but I am open to having that be a consideration as we're considering forage in our herbicide use protocol. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So as far as our limitations of our foliar spray as an approach, as often as possible, we are trying to not use foliar spray. We are trying to use a very controlled cut and paint or cut and dab approach. You'll see, I think even in that slideshow, I called it cut treat or cut paint. That's all, it all means the same thing. So that is extremely controlled, and there's really no possibility of it getting on any other plants. So with our blackberry, that is the approach we use. It's not, there's no broadcasting of it any kind, it's very controlled painting. With treating things like yellow archangel, for example, it is a ground cover that is herbaceous and would be, is not something that you can just cut and paint. It's too herbaceous for that. So we do spray. When we're out there doing that, we are trying our very best, and I had the crew walking around with cardboard to try to block and make sure that no spray was getting on any other plants or any of our fern fronds or anything like that. And it is a possibility that there can be some by spray of other smaller herbaceous plants that are on the ground. That's a reality of that approach. And we try to limit it as much as possible. Both this foliar spray as an approach and the by spray that occurs when that happens. Yeah. Yes.
And I also had a question on the yellow flag irises.
Say again?
I also had a question on the yellow flag irises. Why is it not effective to just dig them out? Because usually they have a pretty big form.
Yeah. Yellow flag iris has a rhizome root that can be pretty difficult to remove in fall, and it grows back. Digging it out is really not very effective. I have tried it and not had a lot of success with that approach. And the research shows that that's really not a very effective approach for managing it. With yellow flag iris, it does have big leaves and is difficult to, it's like with a spray approach, there's a lot of area there. So this year we were using sponges attached to tongs and wiping on the herbicide directly onto the leaves of the yellow flag iris to make sure that it wasn't getting anywhere besides the specific plant that we want. So wherever possible, we're trying to use an approach that's going to keep it as localized and specific as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I'm going to mention just one more quick aspect of this, which is that we are required not only by the protocol, but also by the law, by the label, to sign these areas pretty extensively. And no one will stumble into an area that's been treated without coming across a sign first. And, as Lizzie mentioned, where there's any treatments remotely close to a property boundary, they're being informed of it also. So not just stumbling into the park and possibly harvesting something. So I do want to reiterate for anyone who might be watching that harvesting in the park is actually illegal and is prohibited by the city code.
Hillary, it looks like maybe you have a question.
I do. It's not really a question. It's more just a comment and expression of gratitude. I feel like to go back on what Lisa said, that there is a very charged conversation, as we know, about herbicide and pesticides in our community. And I'm really thankful for all the time that you all spent discussing the regulatory requirements, as well as the science behind how we are chemically managing forest health, because I think the more we can educate people and the public about it, the more productive these conversations can be. So I'm really grateful that you all are spending the time doing that. So thank you.
And Marie, it looks like maybe you have a question as well. I saw you, Geraldine. I will do you next.
I forgot to turn myself off. Sorry.
Oh, I see. Okay, never mind.
And I forgot to turn myself on. I appreciated the staff report, which I was able to read before this, and sort of aligned with Hillary's comment. I'm wondering if you could speak to, I'm looking at, I think, page 9, and paragraph 3 talks about applicable regulations and standards, and you clarify that not only do you conform to the State Department of Ag regulations, but the intent of the protocol is to meet or exceed the criteria of the Salmon Safe Certification Standards for parks and natural areas. I wondered if you could describe this protocol relative to other, and I'm not sure this is fair, but as far as what you know in King County, is this consistent with what other people are doing, or is it more protective, or?
That's a great question. I guess I'm tempted to defer to Elaine as a member of our King County Noxious Weeds Control Board to give a bit more context into what other cities are allowing. Elaine, would you be able to speak to that?
I wish that I could speak to it a little more comprehensively. I'm very sorry that I can't. It's something we could certainly come back and report on, but even as a member of the King County Noxious Weed Control Board, that is not necessarily information we're privy to.
Yeah.
The things that we tend to talk about most are really controlling spread of these listed noxious weeds and what the best practices are, how the staff is deciding on best practices, reducing herbicide use where possible and where it really is necessary. So no, it is certainly a topic for conversation. I will say though, Trustee Poor, that I would say in my estimation, we tend to use a lot less than most agencies. We are far more judicious in our use. The amount that we use per acre of land is very, very low. And just being really thoughtful about really refining what we use on each species to make sure that we're not overusing herbicides in any case, using something that's not effective. So making applications that are not, well placed on our land. And really just reviewing our processes and our best practices constantly. That's something that's been really useful for me sitting on that board and being able to really benefit from other agencies, learning what doesn't work and what works better, and weighing all of those different aspects that Lizzie has talked about insect health, amphibian health, animal health, human health, as well as the ecological consequences, and then also the public sentiment around herbicide is certainly a factor. So it is something that we talk about very often on the staff side, and as Lizzie led off here, I think really well said. We are always looking for ways to minimize our use and really do this thoughtfully. And we appreciate the trust that the Open Space Conservancy Trust has given us in developing these protocols in the past, and really are committed to doing it well and really thoughtfully.
Thanks for that explanation. If there aren't any other questions, we could move. We will be considering this for approval. So, seeing no hands, trustees may I have a motion to approve the herbicide use protocol amendments.
I move that we accept the amendments to the herbicide use protocol as presented in the packet.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Tom and Craig. Any further discussion, anything staff needs to add before we vote?
I was just going to ask if we could, this is Lisa. I don't know if it's appropriate or not, and I don't know what the timeline is for the need for this, but this is a lot of information to digest, and just a lot of kind of, I think, important things to contemplate. I personally would like some time to reflect on it. So, but I know we're only meeting quarterly now, and I know that ties you guys up a little bit. So if you could talk a little bit about that, whether if I were to offer an amendment to take a little bit of extra time on it, because right now I'm not 100% comfortable.
I think that is fine. And if y'all want more time to review, that feels fine to me. I believe our next meeting would be in January. And at this point, there will not be any herbicide used on trust property between now and January. And it's not because y'all aren't letting us, it's because that isn't part of the plan. So that doesn't hold us up. That is, I paused to say that because I want to make sure I'm right about that, but I believe I am. So I think it's appropriate if y'all would like more time to review. I realize that there are a lot of markups on that document and that I just presented you with a lot of information that took me a really long time to put together. So it's a lot to digest. I agree. And if that's what y'all prefer.
And so I'm still learning the parliamentary procedure, but and so I don't know if I amend the motion or table the question. It's just, but the question is would a majority of the trustees agree to postpone a vote on this until January? And if so, that's what I would prefer. If not, we can go ahead and vote.
I think we're a little loose with Robert's Rules of Order, so let's keep talking through this. And a question, or what I heard Lizzie say is there aren't any planned uses, and that is great, but if we don't vote on these changes, then you would be able to use the under the existing unamended protocols if you needed to, right?
Right. Yes, that's a good point.
But-
While I don't expect to even need to do that, I none of the new changes need to be used in the next few months. So that's where.
Great. Does anyone on the board see a
Okay,
reason
I'm
to
not
be-
exactly a parliamentarian, but I would say it's in order to have discussion of the motion after it's been moved. And if the direction or the direction in which the discussion moves is to not approve the motion at this time, then we should vote against it, and then we would have an opportunity to table it and bring it up at the next meeting. Does that sound like a proper procedure? Or
Also not a parliamentarian, but I would say that if that is the way that the trust is feeling at this point, you could also withdraw the motion.
And at that point, then we could table the item and then bring it up for discussion at the next meeting.
all right, well, I think it's reasonable for me to withdraw my motion, and then we can revisit the topic at the next meeting.
That sounds good to me as well.
Is there anyone speaking against that approach? Is there anyone who would like to vote tonight? Great. Okay.
Okay, thanks. I apologize if I'm derailing things in a way that wasn't anticipated, but I just think a little bit more deliberation would probably stand us all in good stead.
Okay, before we close the topic, I'd like to comment on additional information that we might receive in the interim that could be useful. I did a little bit of background research on the mechanisms by which these, especially the newly introduced herbicides, work on plant life, and it gives some insight into how toxic they may be to unintended targets of the application. So including some additional information on those biological mechanisms might be very helpful in considering where we use these the herbicides that are available to us in this protocol. So if I could ask to have that information added to the next packet while we consider this, before we consider this issue again.
Yes, I could definitely do that.
And council members, is there anything else specifically that you would help you with your decision, or and I'm not trying to put you on the spot by any means, but if there's anything in particular, let staff know, I'm sure.
No, like I said, the questions that I asked kind of focused my concerns of the questions about toxicity, questions about, combinations of usage, ultimately reducing the amount that needed to be used. Those things I just wanted to think about, because the toxicities and the soil uptake and binding are different on these chemicals than what we had in the past. And so it's partly sorry, Lizzie, your presentation was great, by the way. And so I totally appreciate that, but it's just processing in my head the pros and cons of all of those things.
That's great. So with the motion withdrawn, I think we can close this item. Craig, you look somewhat expectant as I read your screen. Is there something you wanted to add?
No, I thought it was an excellent presentation as well. I'm very happy with the results of the new amendments, and Lizzie did a fantastic job. So looking forward to having some more discussion in January.
Thank you. On that note, I think we can move to the fourth item of regular business, which is the 84th Avenue Parking Decommission Project update. And thank you, Lizzie. We turn to Sam, the Parks Operation Manager.
I'm gonna, Sam Harb, Parks Operations Manager. I think bounce that back to Lizzie. She's got the update on that.
If you aren't sick of me yet, you will be after this. Let's see. Let me again rearrange my screens here. I don't have a huge amount to update on this, if I'm being honest, but I have a couple of photos and just wanted to give y'all a little status check. Let me see. Oh my gosh, so many windows. Let's see.
I was just trying to remember what was in the packet, and I realized there wasn't an item. So good.
Not a staff report on this one. It's not a huge bulky update. So this is in reference to last year's conversations about trying to restore the the western edge of Pioneer Park Northwest, where folks had been pulling up off of 84th Avenue Southeast and parking alongside the park. And that parking area was, from what I understand, growing wider and wider. So we put in this pilot project to put these T-posts and rope in the ground and stop people from parking there to see how that went. And it went pretty well. This is just kind of reviewing what had happened. So now, as an update to this, the final product is not yet complete, but since last year, when we talked about it last, we had decided to move forward with more permanent markers and restore the area. We brought in an excavator and scraped up a lot of that super compacted gravel and dirt there. We also incorporated in a lot of mulch into the compacted gravel with hopes that that will, if it ever starts raining, start to break down and contribute to the organic matter there. We then began to install these reflective barriers here that are along the roadside and are going to prevent people from parking there. Not super surprisingly, installing these ended up being very difficult because the ground is very compacted and difficult to get these down in the 18 inches that they need to. So we've hit some challenges with the installation with my seasonal crew last year, and I now have called on support from our right-of-way team and our parks maintenance team now that our seasonal crew is done for the season. We needed to order some more materials. Now we've got those in, so we're kind of in the process of finishing up this more permanent barrier installation, and once that is done, we will be removing the T-posts and rope barriers. For now, we've started to see a lot of native plants that are growing in, as well as a lot of blackberry that's growing in. I was disappointed to see. I took a lot of photos back at the beginning of the summer after a really rainy spring, and it looked great. There were a lot of native roses growing in and filling in the space. And then when I was back out there just a couple of weeks ago to take more photos, I saw that the blackberry was winning in the competition. So it will require some more maintenance, which we knew, and we intend to plant along that edge there, some edge appropriate species that will be able to survive in that sun and not grow into the road. But restoration in progress, more permanent barriers are being installed, and that installation is not yet complete. And that is my update. I am happy to answer any questions y'all have about that.
Any questions? It looks like not. I had noticed last time I walked by that a lot of the new mulch that have been spread. So that's great. Yeah, that's really been impressive. With that, let's move on to the fifth item of regular business, the special events policy revisions. I'm going to guess this is Sam Harp.
Yeah, Sam Harp, Parks Operations Manager for the record. So we've had a couple opportunities to talk about this item. Little backstory is that in around 2013, a policy was finalized that was related to special events in Pioneer Park and Ingstrom Open Space. This was in response to just a couple of user groups that were had a lot of people in the park, in the open spaces, and were either causing damage or potentially causing damage. And so at the time, the trust and city staff worked together and put this policy in place. Recently, it's been shown to be a little bit outdated. And so we've been working through some changes. I have a copy of the original policy with some red line adjustments, and we can, I think in our last conversation, there was some very specific ideas and suggestions for specific language. And I think that would be something good for us to work through. I'll go ahead and share my screen and just kind of give an overview of what I have changed in here, and then we can discuss. Oh, that's not it. There we go. Wow.
That looked promising. That was the Word document. That was the draft.
Yeah,
That's what we saw.
mine's being kind of problematic. All right. Do you all see the draft?
We do.
Okay. That's odd. It's showing that I'm showing a different screen. Okay. So here in the first page, I'll zoom in a little bit. This was some language that was discussed to be added. I'll kind of go through and then tell you all what I think, and then we can kind of talk about it at the end. So I added the note that off-trail use of Pioneer Park is prohibited except for approved educational, scientific, or forest health activities. I eliminated the line that said any participant may go off, maintain trails or turf areas at any times. And then I added off-trail use, parentheses, limited to educational and scientific work. Changed a couple titles to match some of our current staff. And then moving down, so talking about the fees, these rates are consistent with our special events policy. And so that's a pretty straightforward adjustment. Getting into the damage deposit table, you know, I looked at this and I kind of asked around and did some research on the past, and you know, what led to these numbers and if they're still effective. And we also have a special events policy has a fee schedule administered through our recreation team. And comparing that to this, I find these numbers still appropriate. They're quite a bit higher than the other fees we have for special events. I can show you all those as well as part of this conversation. But I think, you know, the specific, you know, these are significant fees for damage deposits, and they're, like I said, they're quite a bit higher than what our normal special event permit process or deposit fees are. And I think the reason for that is just because these are different properties and they have different uses, and they're not really, you know, meant to be used the same way, you know, summer camps or, you know, big summer camps or events that might happen at in a huge lawn area in a bigger park, for example. So I would just state that I think these numbers are still appropriate, and I think we can talk about adjusting them higher or lower. I would say that the floor should still be what we have outlined in our special event fee schedule, which, just to mention, it ranges from around $125 to a little over $1,500 plus staff fees. So I think they're appropriate, and I think yeah, down here I eliminated the restoration costs portion because it's really tough to get what these restoration costs are talking about are damages essentially, and so it's hard to determine a cost per square foot or anything when you don't really know what kind of damage is done. So I thought it was just simpler to eliminate that. And those are about all the changes that I made initially. If you all have any comments, we can kind of go through this a little bit or make some adjustments.
I see Tom has his hand up.
Yes, my comment regarding the damage deposit last time was that I thought that it would be appropriate to increase those numbers substantially. And the reason being is not to charge more money, but it's to place in the minds of the people organizing events that they have a responsibility to preserve the trust properties substantially in the condition in which they found them. And whether or not those numbers are adjusted as I recommend, which would be to just roughly double them to keep pace with inflation. The text that accompanies the table should be updated to say that these are 2022 figures and will be adjusted to reflect inflation going forward. So we're not in 2013 anymore. We shouldn't be calculating things in 2013 dollars. And besides which, it would be misleading to someone to look at that table and then discover that the inflation adjusted amount that they needed to put down was $750 rather than $500. So it's better to start fresh with some numbers that we believe in.
That's a good catch, Tom. I didn't see that. Thanks, Marie, please.
I agree with Tom, 2013 should be 2022. And if we're gonna amend this thing in 2022, we probably ought to update everything in it, but, and I would change the language of will be adjusted to may be adjusted, because it seems like, I mean, Sam, you tell me if we've been charging something other than these tables, but if, in 11 years, we haven't actually charged more than what's on the table, I guess we should change it to May and then leave it at the discretion of staff to say, we've had 12% inflation, maybe we ought to do something as opposed to 2% inflation. I tend to agree that these numbers are substantial. I think we should keep in mind the kinds of groups that are actually using the park. And they're not groups that tend to have deep pockets. And even a $500 deposit is going to be a lot, I think. Tell me if I'm wrong about who's actually using the park. But it seems to me like it's, kind of charitable, youth-oriented kind of groups. Am I right about that?
Well, if the question's for me, there just haven't been very many of these groups. So, is that kind of what you were asking?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of asking whether the kinds of groups that use the park for these purposes are ones that, you know, are financially sizable, or whether it's, you know, the Boy Scouts and you know, groups like that where I don't know, asking them to pay more than $500 for deposits might be asking a lot. I guess it's a question of whether $500 is meaningful for them. Maybe that's the way to put it.
Well, yeah, I mean, the group that brought this up was a small summer camp group, and they didn't fall within the category of needing to do the damage deposit because of the nature of their activities and the size of the group. So, but that would potentially be a big impact to them, I would assume. I just don't have enough examples of other groups that have gone through this because it just hasn't been used in a few years.
So Marie, I'm gonna jump in if I may, just to say what I hear you talking about might be the difference between a nonprofit and more of a profit-making company that might be running a race and charging a fee or something. And I wonder along those lines if there are different policies in the city, if the city ever has an experience of either waiving when a group appears to be non-profit, or so either waiving or having different rates. Is there any experience with that in the city?
I could probably speak to that a little bit, just to maybe not illuminate completely, but to point in the direction where I or somebody else could do some more research on. I know that there are tiered or classifications for rental of the community and event center that are based on whether it's a local group and you know, or nonprofit or other things. I can't remember what all the criteria are, but there's definitely a way to do that. But that's a rental, of course. That's, you're paying for the space, and it's maybe okay to not charge full freight to Mercer Island residents who already pay a lot of taxes, and to charge a higher rate to people who are using the facility who aren't contributing to the community. The damage deposit situation for me is more of, it should not necessarily be tiered, because as a landlord, I would say damage deposits are there to incent people to behave well. And the nature of the group doesn't necessarily drive that. So but it has to actually be a risk, or it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I thought how a group like the Boy Scouts, because they want to use it for 4 hours and it's going to cost them $800. I realize they're going to get it back if they don't do any damage, but it's still an $800 check they have to write.
But then what happens if they do damage and we haven't taken a deposit?
Well, so we keep, all I'm saying is we really have to increase it substantially. I think $800 is a lot of money for the Boy Scouts. If that's the, or, you know, some group that wants to run a bunch of, you know, grade school kids through a bicycle camp or something. I don't know. I just don't want to make it punitive, and I don't want to box people out from using the park just because it costs too much. It costs so much.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe there should be some thought, maybe not at this point, but in the future, some thought to adjusting the deposit based on the type of activity, you know, where a walk is not going to create as much of a damage deposit as a bicycle activity. Also, you know, intersecting with the number of participants and stuff. Like I said, my position would be higher damage deposits are good. I think if a responsible organization says, yeah, we have to put this up, but there's no risk because our people are going to behave well, great. And if they go, I don't know if our people are going to behave well or not, I don't have any control over them, well, then they should pay a higher amount.
It's more the initial, can they even write a check for the $800? That's all. Anyway, those are my comments.
Thank you, Marie. Shall we move to Tom Hildebrand?
Yes, I just wanted to point out that we decided last time that the lower bound on the number of people participating before we would even start to ask for a damage deposit is 50, which is a lot of people. And if your damage deposit is $500 for 50 people, that's $10 a person. That's lunch. So it's not really asking a lot of money when you break it down per person. And again, there should be some risk involved. If you want to have lunch and dinner on the damage deposit that you get back, then I think that's okay.
Yeah, no, okay, I take your point. So how much higher do you think we could go? You're on mute.
So yeah, I hear a conversation between Marie and Tom, but Tom is on mute.
Sorry, I just said, as I stated earlier, I think that doubling the numbers that appear in the table would be a good starting point.
Thank you. Is Hillary still here or Craig? I don't think we've heard from you.
Well, I'm supportive of the numbers in the table. I think they're fine. So that's my 2 cents.
As is, you're saying, as proposed by staff.
Right.
Okay. Hillary, you're welcome to share if you have anything, but also not. And I'm torn when someone gives the example of a bicycle. So on my behalf, I feel like there may be other parks that are more appropriate, and if a higher rate drives some uses away, I think that's appropriate for the open space area, and that some uses could go to other areas on the island. So I'm not as worried about the rate driving people away. I think, let's see, yeah, we are scheduled to make a decision on this. And I'm hearing split opinions on this. Could I just take a straw poll here of, oh, and thank you, I see hands up now. So Hillary, Sam, is your comment directed to something that's been said already? And
I can speak after Hillary.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, sorry, I lost you guys for a moment. I tend to agree with the pro and the kind of yay supportive thoughts here, because I really do believe that we need to help people to understand how valuable the ecosystem services are that we are protecting in the park. And I definitely am pro the prices that exist. I think they need to exist for that reason. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Hillary, it seems like some of the conversations about doubling them or raising them to some extent. And are you saying you're happy with it where they are?
I am happy with where they are. I think that they are substantial enough. I do believe that they are attainable for people. But I do understand where people are at, but I think they are fine as Sam has drafted them.
Okay, thanks for that. Off to Sam now, please. And Lisa after.
I'm sorry, one clarifying question before Sam speaks, it might help. I don't see this table as being redlined. So are these the existing rates and they're proposed to be doubled? Or I lost track of the conversation with all of the, double it, keep it where it is, whatever. So just a little clarification before we call a vote on this would be great.
Of course. Okay. So Sam, do you want to take that question as well as?
Yeah, I can speak to that. And I also wanted to speak to earlier comment regarding the 2013 figure under the table. And what I would just propose is cleaning that up and saying, and removing the date and just saying the fee schedule may be adjusted to keep up with inflation or to keep up with costs or things like that. To the last question, this table is the original table. And when I looked into it and compared it to some of our other fees, I found these numbers to be pretty high compared to those, and so it felt like there's still, in my opinion, appropriate numbers to use, and with the intent of making it a significant deposit to hold these kind of activities in a fragile ecosystem, just to account for any damage. So that's this table has not been adjusted
Since the earlier draft. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Sam, for that clarification. I would at least be in favor of considering adjusting them upward based on the conversations we've had, but obviously it will be the majority.
All right, well, let me put that into a motion then. I don't hear a lot of support for doubling the numbers, but I'll make a specific proposal that we, in order to in some way accommodate the notion of inflation in the meantime, we multiply all of the numbers in the table by 1.5, by 150%. And so that is my motion. I move we adjust the numbers in the table upward to 150% of their current, or the values shown in the table.
Thank
I'll
you.
second that.
Okay, and Lisa, good. So we may have to do a roll call vote, but first, well, why don't we just call for a roll call vote because I'm not sure how that would work in Zoom very well. So can staff?
Okay, well, and I would just offer that once a motion's been offered and seconded, there is additional opportunity for discussion. And I don't know if we've already had that. I just want to make sure we do that if we need to.
Good, thank you. Let's take conversation. Thanks, Lisa, for that reminder.
And there is none.
Well, yeah. I'm trying to gather my thoughts. My intent is to support the numbers they're at here with the opportunity to raise them in the future. I have heard staff say that the risk is not high because there have not been a significant number of people using the park. And I come from kind of a nonprofit approach where I feel like people may not be able to I understand that these numbers are already higher than other special events places, which I hope will drive people to other locations, but this already represents a premium for the park. And so that's where my vote is. Does anyone else want to share their thoughts of how they'll vote?
I agree with you, Jerry.
As do I.
So do I.
Okay, we can call for the vote. or if there's a friendly amendment, or let's just call for the vote. Okay, all in favor of the motion by Tom Hildebrandt to factor the dollar numbers up by 1.5 times, please say aye.
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 And thank you. And opposed? Say nay.
No. Nay?
Nay.
Nay.
Okay.
Well, and I'm sorry, I can't really see, so I think the motion's defeated, but I think then I guess the second question is would it be useful to have an asterisk or a footnote that says that these fees may be adjusted to account for inflation, where we don't have to come back for a trustee vote, or is that doable, or is that too cumbersome? Based on the consumer price index, or whatever, however.
Yeah, I heard, Sam, could you please restate what you would intend to do with that sentence that says any numbers or times, well, the second sentence, these are $2013 and the fee schedule will be adjusted to keep pace with inflation. Can you describe what you proposed?
Yeah, I was just gonna propose to eliminate this portion and just have the fee schedule will be adjusted to keep pace with inflation. May be adjusted. I didn't have my so yeah, that's basically what I'm proposing. If y'all could still see that.
Yeah, was there a proposal? Ah, well done.
Okay.
It could say to keep pace with inflation and cost increases.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So thank you for that frank discussion and vote. And why don't we get a motion on the table to approve the special events policy revisions, and then we can discuss that more if there are other sections that need further discussion. Murray?
I was just gonna insert the typographical. That sentence below the table seems to be not in the same typeface size document. And at the beginning, there's a period missing after the inserted text about Pine Park. So that's typographical.
I had trouble hearing that. Did staff catch that?
I was having a little trouble hearing that as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the sentences that are below the table seem not to be in the same typeface size as the rest of the document. Did you catch that?
Yeah, we could heard that.
Then that at the beginning where there was a sentence inserted about Pioneer Park, it was a period missing at the end of the sentence. Aside from that, I move that we approve the policy as amended for our conversation this evening.
I'd second
Murray?
that.
Okay, great, thank you. Murray, could you clarify where that, is there a number on the Pioneer Park sentence that needs a period at the end?
Go to the top of the document, we inserted a sentence about.
On page 1?
No. Sentence.
Are you talking about right here?
Yep.
Right.
Thank you. Now, we have a motion and a second to approve this with the changes that have been discussed, with the exception of the vote that we took against the grid. Further discussion on this motion? Marie, your hand's up.
So, only because I don't know how to put it down.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to call for the question. All in favor of the motion to approve this as discussed, please say aye.
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 Any, and all opposed, say nay. Thank you so much, everyone. Back to my agenda. The sixth item of regular business is the bike rack location. Thanks again for the discussion of that last item. Bike rack location will be Sam as I read it.
Yeah, Sam Hart, Parks Operations Manager for the record. Last meeting, the idea was brought up for an agenda item for this meeting to install a bike rack in, I think I might have had the initial suggestion of the location wrong, northeast or northwest, and that's something you all can discuss, but I don't have any visuals or anything, but from a staff perspective, it's definitely something we can look at sourcing and installing, and it's probably, you know, doable at that point. So I'll leave it all to you to discuss potential locations, and if you want to make the recommendation to go forward with that.
Marie, is that a new hand?
Yeah, it is. So my thought was that I guess the best location would be the southeast corner of the northwest quadrant, where we already have a big sign and some places to sit down. It's kind of a gathering place anyway, and wouldn't introduce, you know, any kind of it would make it less natural, let's put it that way. And I'm not thinking giant, I'm just thinking a place to, you know, put 3 or 4 bikes.
Marie, may I ask you a clarifying question? Are you saying over by where the bench is or over by where the picnic table is?
Over by the benches, so it's a corner of, I guess, 68th and IMS, where we already have a big sign and there's logs hanging around for people to sit on, and the porta potty is there. It just seems like a logical place to locate a bike rack. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm just a person who goes and meets people and would just as good bike as opposed to get into my car.
I need to clarify again. I'm sorry. Did you say that over, you said the southeast of the northwest? So you're saying where the kiosk is that?
Yeah, where the
Right.
potty is, right.
Okay. Other discussion? Craig.
I think that sounds like a reasonable location. It's kind of a meeting area. The other spot, of course, is over by the picnic table with the bird on it. That sounds fine to me if that would be an okay spot to put it near the porta potty.
So should we provide that as guidance to staff? And if seems to me like that's logical, if staff has some reason, well, yeah, I would say that's guidance. The notes here say recommended action. Do we need to make a motion on this?
No, I don't think so. I think it's more guidance for staff to take
We
it
do
under
not need to
advisement.
make a motion, just a recommendation. If you have one, is received. I do see
Thank
that Tom has his hand up though.
Thank you, Tom.
Oh, yes, I was wondering a little bit about the background of this idea, because I think that most people that would come to the park on their bicycles stay on their bicycles in the park. It doesn't seem like it's a destination particularly that you would go to on a bicycle and then want to park the bike and walk around. But then that's just the way I would use it. So I was wondering if there were requests for a bike rack or just where the idea comes from.
Marie? Are you responding to Tom?
It's a suggestion that came from me, just my own personal experience of going to meet people for a walk in the park and ending up over at the QFC in my car instead of on my bike at the park. That's, and I figure I'm probably not alone in saying, let's meet up at the park and go for a walk. And if there were a way to encourage people to use their bicycles instead of their cars, I'm all for that. And it seems to me kind of an innocuous thing to put in the park, but also, in the same spirit as why do we have the park?
Hillary? Oh, should we move to Hillary?
Oh, I totally agree with Marie, and I would ride my bike down to Pioneer to walk regularly, as I know what a lot of people in my neighborhood by Ellis Pond, so that we don't have to burn the fossil fuels.
Thank you, Lisa. Council member?
Yeah, oh, thanks. You can call me Lisa. But I just thought too, as kids, we would ride our bikes to places and then, adventure in the woods. It wouldn't necessarily be a full-time bicycle day. So, because that's the only way as kids you get any place without your parents. So I think it's a good idea.
And Tom, your hand's still up.
Yeah, re-raised. Okay, well, that seems like a reasonable explanation. Then from a practical standpoint, I think it makes good sense to put the bike rack in a location where it's going to be reasonably secure. And when I think about that, I think about something that gets a lot of traffic, or is highly visible. So from that aspect, I would recommend the location closer to the picnic table than the kiosk, because it's kind of woody around the kiosk. It's hidden from the street, whereas the area near the picnic table is visible from the street. It's going to be less attractive for someone to come in there and start stealing bicycles. So that's my recommendation on siting. And if there are similar sites that are visible from the street, that also would elevate them in my estimation.
Thank you, Tom. Any discussion?
Sounds like two good options. We'll leave it up to staff.
Great. I don't know if we're going to make Lisa's 7 o'clock challenge here. The seventh item.
Sorry, I'm going to jump in and just say, I do want to recognize that we do lose our quorum at 7 when Councilmember Anderell steps off the call, which is fine. And so I just want to make sure that everyone understands this isn't just about making action items, but having substantive discussion about anything pertaining to the trust. So my assumption is that we will actually adjourn the meeting when we lose the quorum, so we can move through things in the next 7 minutes very quickly, I think. And my suggestion might be to, on the draft work plan items, that if trustees have ideas about things that they would like to see potentially on the work plan for 2023, to send those directly to staff, to Sam specifically. And then that can be part of the January discussion. That doesn't need to be something that we discussed this evening. So you see the draft plan in front of you. We are definitely open to suggestions.
And is a quorum, that you're saying a quorum is 6, and I thought a quorum might be 5.
A quorum is 5. And to my understanding, do we lose that?
3.
Oh,
Craig.
do we? Oh, no, we don't lose the quorum. I'm so sorry. We had various this evening. I'm so sorry.
Elaine, we were counting on you.
All right, let's
and
keep
I can't
moving.
count to 6, so it's okay.
Okay, so we have two recommendations to staff for the location of the bike rack, and I appreciate the thinking about the visibility. And do you anticipate installing it in the next 3 months?
We might have to wait for it to dry out a bit, but
Yeah.
we'll definitely.
Okay, we'd love
Yeah.
to hear what you decide based on that, and you have votes as you've heard what we've thought. Elaine, could you share with us the Engstrom title transfer issue, please?
I would be happy to, and at a leisurely pace. No, I'm just kidding. This isn't a big item, but I do promise to report back to the trust on progress on the Engstrom title transfer to the trust. As many of you saw, this actually went to the city council at the September 20th meeting in the form of a resolution. It was passed on consent by the council at that meeting. I included the resolution in your agenda packet, which outlines the terms of the transfer. I did speak to our legal department this afternoon, and they assured me that they are about to begin on the paperwork needed to actually perform this transfer. I'm not going to give you a hard and fast end date on when this will be completed, but I certainly hope to pass along good news to you in the new year about the this final piece of the puzzle coming together for the trust and Engstrom being included in trust properties. And I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
I'd just like to say thank you for getting this moving.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing it to our attention. I know staff was, I know it was a bit of a long process, but we're glad to see the resolution of it at least coming very soon. So appreciate that.
It was very eagle-eyed of you, Tom. Thank you. Let's briefly, let's introduce the 2023 work plan. And Lisa, I hope you will be able to send email comments if you have them to Sam, and then we'll address it in January. Sam, please.
All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen. That looks right. I will start out by saying there was mention of moving or continuing the herbicide topic to January. That's something we could do. But going through, so we've got the annual report to council in January, the open space work plan, restoration work plan, quadrant reports ongoing. In the April meeting, we have the trail work plan, letterboxing program. Then in July, election of officers, off-leash dogs, herbicide application report. And then late in the year, we've got the Eagle Project recognition. So this is kind of what we have lined out for now. There's likely going to be other things that come up and sort of fill things in, but I can go ahead and add in the herbicide application or the herbicide use protocol amendments for January. I think that's probably appropriate.
Thank you. Do the trustees have comments, edits, or additions? I do not. So I liked Elaine's suggestion that we might, this is often, our first view of it is just to discuss it, and then we usually vote on it at our first meeting in the year, so January would be that opportunity. And Elaine proposed that we email ideas to Sam over the next probably 2 to 2.5 months, and then he can get that out to us for the January action. So with no further discussion, I'm just checking the screen here to make sure nobody has a late breaking item. All right, in other business, we welcome Sam to present on department and city updates. Thanks. Do you have any updates for us today, Sam?
Yeah, just a moment. I'm uploading.
Thank you. After this, we'll do quadrant reports so folks can get their thoughts ready for quadrant reports.
All right, can y'all see that?
Not yet.
No.
Here we go. We're seeing the Zoom screen.
All right, thank
There we
you.
are. There we are.
Oh,
So I have just a few reports. I think this is a good opportunity for us to kind of share what we have going on. Mainly some important staffing updates. So many of you know Andrew Prince. He has been in a few roles throughout the city, mostly related to trails and urban forestry. He has his most recent role has been in the trails and urban forestry technician role, and he has since moved into a new position to the city, the urban forestry project manager. This is a new position where he's sort of oversees trees and urban forestry within not only the parks, but the right-of-ways as well. I'll get more to that soon. We also have Jordan Fisher. Jordan came on in, I believe, May of this year. And a little backstory to that, we started looking at creative ways to do our volunteer programs. And we saw a lot of, trouble and difficulty with some of our contractors that would help us with that work, and also some rising costs. So in kind of a new thing for us, we brought on Jordan to develop our own program, and it's been going really well. So Jordan is in a seasonal position as a natural resources volunteer coordinator. So this is Andrew Prince. He is now our urban forestry project manager, and he a big part of what he does, he manages contracted tree work throughout parks, open spaces, and right-of-way. He performs tree risk assessments, fields customer service inquiries, and routine inspections. And another portion of his many duties are to develop and implement vegetation programs for streets, sidewalks, trails, parks, and open spaces. And this is really exciting. It's been a new thing for us to be able to consolidate our treed areas around the island, and it's been going really well. He's had a lot of contracted work where, working with the right-of-way team, and he's able to batch work where it makes sense, and look at things more just more comprehensively rather than before maybe just focusing in one area. So he's really hit the ground running. It's similar to some aspects are similar to what he was doing before, but this is a little bit more of a professional development for Andy, and there's tons of work to do, and it's really exciting to see how that position will grow with the city. So Jordan, our seasonal volunteer coordinator, a couple of stats from Jordan's work. From June through September 2022, they hosted 23 events with 223 volunteers, 2 forest steward orientations, and brought on 10 new forest stewards. Started a volunteer photography position with 5 active photographers. This is always nice to, document all the nice volunteer work that's going on. And Jordan's been really helpful at establishing a lot of partnerships within the community, local clubs and organizations, Aljoya, Scouts of America, Girl Scouts, Mercer Island Rotary Club, French American School, Seattle University, Environmental Studies Department, as well as some other groups, different businesses that have their employees do volunteer events and things like that. There's been a lot of really creative events with artistic aspects, and it's just been really interesting and well liked by the community. Some other staffing updates over kind of on the parks maintenance side. We have 2 vacancies that we're in the process of recruiting and selecting for. Another note about the parks maintenance team, we have a very new team. So a lot of new folks are at the city. Some have, or city parks maintenance team, some have worked for us as seasonals before and transitioned into more permanent positions. Other team members have come from other cities, other states, and we have it's a very new team. It's a very just energetic and skilled team. There's a lot of knowledge, and there's a good mix of historical knowledge and experienced folks, and also just new people that are newer to the work and just enthusiastic about it. We're also planning for a seasonal cruise in 2023. We utilize seasonals in the natural resources and the trails and in the restoration, and also on the regular parks maintenance side. So that was a bit challenging for us in 2022 with just trying to find and recruit help for that kind of work. And so we're planning for how that's going to look in 2023. And also with Andy moving that position, we're sort of re-looking at how we do that. So in the meantime, Andy's still with us. He's still available. He's not going to be necessarily responding to so many of the trails related issues, but I would encourage you to utilize you can always email staff, but we do have our MI Connect service request system that gets funneled directly to the crew. So we have a lot of folks around that can step in and take care of things in all the parklands. And that's about it for my staffing update.
Thank you, Sam. Any discussion or comments from board members? I know oh yeah, Marie, please.
Okay, thanks. I just want to say something about Jordan's position. I hate to hear it being described as seasonal. Because I think that it's a job that requires a full-time position, and I also think it's a job that requires continuity from season to season. We want to keep our volunteer relationships connected to the city. But also, she's done a fabulous job. I've been at several of her events, and she, gets things together, I think her statistics speak for themselves. I'd love to know how to convey that to the city council and make sure that it's considered when they're doing budgets. Because I really do believe that that needs to be a full-time job. I think I'll send a note to, Jesse and Lisa.
I would second your comments about Jordan. I've enjoyed working, attending some of the meetings and volunteer opportunities. And then Andrew doesn't come in front of the board very often, but I know the work that he does is so appreciated for a long time that he's been here on staff. So I think your hiring department is making some great hires. Thank you. Present staff included.
Yeah, I'd like to say a word in support of both of them. I've been to a couple of the volunteer events, and Jordan's doing a fantastic job. So if there was an opportunity to turn that into a full-time position, there's always work to be done. And there's education that can be done throughout the year, so it doesn't have to be seasonal.
I agree with what everyone else says. Jordan and Andy and all the rest of you are doing a tremendous job, and we are so fortunate to have you with us and doing everything that you're doing. We're so much better off for it as a community, so thank you.
And on that note of admiration, let's move on to quadrant reports. If you're done, Sam, with your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. And
in
thank
the
you for
Northwest.
all the feedback. Just
Good.
thanks.
Good. Let's start with the Northwest quadrant where we have Tom Hildebrand and Hillary, if I have that noted correctly.
Yes, Jerry, I tend to walk most of the quadrants, but I'm happy to speak to the Northwest. I think it's looking great overall. I think it's really noticeable with all of the painted tree roots for high visibility, for tripping hazards, some of the work that has been done to try to make the paths more walkable year round with the way that they've been leveled out and everything. And then in the southeast, the ivy ring work is impressive. And the way that Andy and company and Lizzie and everyone has managed the ravine trail is especially impressive, considering all of the down trees that we've had in the past 2 years. So I think overall the park is looking excellent.
Yes, I would say the same, so I don't have anything to add to that.
Northeast is Marie and Craig. Any reports from either of you? Yes, Marie.
I have not been there recently. I've been kind of out of town. I didn't notice anything last time I was there, and I assume we haven't had any weather conditions, so I'm hoping things are okay. I don't know if Craig has been there or not.
Craig, you need to come off mute. Sorry.
Yeah, I was there today. Me and 3 other people I saw with our masks on because of the smoke, but it's just super dry, as we all know. The trails are in great shape though. And unfortunately, down by the bridge, there was some plantings done. I don't know when. I haven't been down there in a long time, but most of them have died. So that's that area that's walled off with the fence to keep the dogs from cutting through, which is still looking good right there. But some of the new plants just haven't survived this dry weather. 2 things. There's some pavement cuts in the trail next to the Island Crest Way. There's like 3 of them, look like they're ready to be torn out and new pavement put in, but it looks like they've been that way for a while. I think it was 27, 28, and 29. So I have no idea what's going on there, but it's waiting action whenever. And then the new paving on, I think it's 68th, they restored the shoulders in the parking areas, so it's quite nice. The paving is really wonderful. And then also the city has installed reflective coatings on the stop signs and the crosswalk signs, and highly reflective. Just fantastic. That should help, you know, keep people safe from crossing the streets in those areas. So that's really well done. That's a great product. So that's it.
Thank you. And Southeast is Carol, who we hope is feeling better soon, and myself. And I have nothing specific. I've been getting to know those trails after not having walked them as much. So it's generally looks good. I've seen a lot of cleanup and some of those piles of brush ready to dry. So great round of reports. Thanks, everyone. Next on the agenda is the opportunity to raise items for future discussion. Does anyone have anything we need to come back and post on the public notice and then discuss at our January meeting, in addition to what we've already forwarded? Great. And so the reminder is, actually, I would like to bring one thing up at this point in time, which is simply to say, Sam, you sent us an email during this interim period from someone who had strong feelings about dogs and dogs on leash. Is that something you could refresh, and perhaps we would want to say something about that? Or are we supposed to talk about it next month after we public notice it?
We can talk about discussing it next time. I think it was just some feedback from a citizen or parks patron, and last year I did not have much to add as far as the off-leash dog discussion portion of our work plan. So this is something relevant to that, so we can I mean, y'all can review the email, and we can discuss it at another time, or at the corresponding date in the work plan, which is a little later. That's the July meeting, so we can speak to that earlier, and it can lead up to that. But that's just kind of a one-off, and I was just passing it on because the issue had kind of been dealt with from a enforcement perspective, or at least reported. So there's not necessarily any action, but I think it's important for us to keep track of those items, and if we can definitely discuss them and add it to a future agenda.
So you clarified the one thing I wanted to confirm, that the fact that you forwarded that one is evidence that you are forwarding what you get, and there haven't been other emails. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there haven't been any in these areas last year.
Thanks. Could we get a motion to adjourn? I'll say the next open space meeting is scheduled for January 19th at 5 p.m. And I guess we don't need a motion to adjourn, so I'm going to keep reading that the time is now 7:19 and the meeting is adjourned. And trustees, we ask that you stay seated until the city's terminated the Zoom broadcast. Good evening, stay safe and healthy.